Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Compelling Conversations podcast. Today, I'm very happy to be joined by my friend Robert. Robert, thanks so much for being here, man.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we've been meaning to do this for a long time, and now we're here, which is cool. And it's in a very stylistic circumstance, as we can see in your image.
Yeah, certainly. I don't want to mess with my circadian rhythm. We're recording this video rather late. Um, but I don't mind. I don't mind the timing. It's just the lighting is going to be affected so that I'm not imbalancing my hormones, specifically through the pituitary gland.
This is interesting that you mentioned this because you're the man that introduced me to the grayscale setting on the phone. You're talking about circadian rhythm. Explain to me right now, what does the lighting have to do with your circadian rhythm?
So basically, the circadian rhythm just deals with your sleep cycle. When humans were evolving, we were strictly going under the natural flow of the sun, the solar cycle. Oh, it's strictly dark at night, strictly bright during the day, and then in between, there's hues of red, orange, and yellow that that take time. Take a few hours to increase and decrease the brightness throughout the day. And because we evolved in that manner, um, thanks to the Industrial Revolution and the invention of the light bulb and etc., we are dehumanizing ourselves by uh, creating these artificial sources of light that that we were never used to. So, so for example, working a night job in bright daylight, in bright artificial daylight, it won't be good for the human biology. And it might sound outlandish, but for sure it can be noticed in the what I recently discovered is the calcification of the pituitary gland located in the right in the in the brain between the cerebellum and the rest of the telencephalon.
When you were talking about what you were talking about, I was thinking about the human progress, the human advancement with all these inventions and whatnot, discoveries. Is every step forward a cure and a curse? What do you think?
It's interesting when you put it like that because it's uh, like I'm looking for now, I'm looking at it as more of a curse because sure, there's cures like biologically speaking, we came up with a cure for polio and several other diseases. So that's a win for us. But there's other technologies that we've also invented along the way that they didn't really cure anything. They just kind of sped up the the process. They sped up progress, but they have done so faster than we can handle them, faster than we have learned to be responsible with them. Specifically, like the probably the most obvious example is smartphones. Too many of us are addicted to say the least, and we don't bother taking action. We just kind of accept it as it is, and it has affected our society in several ways.
Yeah. When I was asking that question about the cure or the curse, I was just thinking about my own life and how every step forward, it does give you something, but it also takes away something. Like something painful had to happen to you, so to speak, on whatever level before you gained wisdom or thick skin, so to speak.
Yes,
So I
precisely.
guess, yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
like
bit
they
of
say in
both,
the
huh?
Marines. Yeah, they say that pain is weakness leaving the body. You know, that's not. It's a pretty creative quote, but it's not entirely true because there's many different forms of pain and there's many different sources of strength. And
Yeah.
some hardships make you stronger, and that's a good thing, but there's other types of hardships that we don't really benefit from, like drug addiction. That's a sort of hardship that will have destroyed many lives, and there's very little to benefit from that.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that. My favorite musician, Chris Cornell, you look like him, even though we can't really see it in the lighting. But he said something interesting about drug addiction. He's like, he was talking about in the world of music, how when a rock star does, get involved in drugs and it goes bad for them, people are always focused on that. And they're always looking at it as if, well, that was going to happen anyways because of that world or whatever. But he was saying nobody really thinks about like the average person out there that nobody knows who they are. They don't know their name. They don't know anything about their life, but they get addicted and then they go down a dark hole. It's like there's so many people out there that get lost in that world, but the focus is looked at people with a big name. And if they get lost, the attention starts to shift over there.
Yeah, for sure. It's much scarier for normal people because living a quote unquote normal life, your only sources of hope are your friends and family. And some of us don't have very much of those, if at all. Some of us are orphans, some of us are just lonely. And and that's ironic because that's probably one of the reasons why people even start doing drugs in the first place because they want to find a solution, so to speak, to this problem that they're facing, and the solution is actually only making their life worse.
Yeah. I remember an Australian YouTuber, Struthless. He was talking about drugs, and he was saying that the best time is the first time, and after that, it only goes downhill. It never gets better. And he was trying to get clean. He got clean, and he was sharing his experience through that. And I thought about that, and it's like that's a lot of pain trying to hit that high again, but it never comes to you. If anything, it takes you into an underworld. It's like, damn, it becomes a sad chase for something.
Yeah, I've heard of that. There's actually a term for it, I think. It's called chasing the dragon.
Really.
Yeah, I forgot. I
And that
forgot.
is a strange way to put it because, I think a lot about serpents and dragons, right? And the serpent to me is like the evil thing. If it bites you, if you fight it, it bites you, and now its poison is inside of you. That's a terrible thing. But the dragon is the thing you want because even if it burns you, you turn to ash, but you can be reborn as the phoenix. Like there's that opportunity for rebirth. But if the venom's in you from the serpent, you're done. You die a carcass.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I never heard someone put it like that. But yeah, I
Yeah.
can I can see how that makes sense because a dragon is a mystical creature. You've never No one's ever seen one in real life before. Or so I would imagine if you thought you saw one, you would try to chase after it, try to embrace its power, maybe take a video of it. Or even before the time that the cameras existed, you'd want
Well,
to
the
try to get a best
symbolism,
view.
yeah, the symbolism behind the dragon, for me at least, is it's that big, scary, daunting thing that you don't want to face, but you have to face it, right? And so what it is like if you go after a snake, you're picking a fight with the wrong thing, but you're picking it thinking you'll win because it's smaller than you. It's like that's not the case. You need to turn around, you need to face the dragon. The hero fights the dragon. So it's like all symbols. It's like we need to face the dragon in our lives because that is what will really give us the gold, right? If you look into like the mythological stories, not fighting the serpent.
Yeah, and And the reason we even chased the dragon to begin with is because we were trying to get away from another battle, and
Mm.
we were seeking solace in whatever substance it was. So it's kind of ironic that to get away from one battle, you have to deal with another.
What is that other battle to you? I'm not sure I understand that exactly.
So like I had mentioned earlier, usually people take drugs to escape from some other pain, but now that you take the drug and you're chasing the dragon, you just have to face another battle separately, and it doesn't necessarily get rid
It
of
makes you
the initial
weaker.
one.
Yes, like the
Precisely.
fight is still there. The big fight is still there. But because you're like with the drugs, it doesn't put you in any better position to face it, so to speak.
Yeah, precisely.
Huh.
And I can only
Interesting.
imagine what it's like to be in that situation. Because I've actually never done drugs, but I know plenty of people that have, and it it seems like, and it definitely seems like I was right about that. It's not a type of hardship that makes you stronger. If anything, it makes you weaker. So it contradicts the original quote I had mentioned earlier. It's not a pain that makes you stronger. It's a pain that's doing the opposite.
Yeah. It's a sad world, and I don't know what words I would use to talk about it, but yeah, it's definitely rough out there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Especially now, like I had mentioned with you in an earlier conversation, is that society is trying to conform to such dehumanizing conditions, and hormones are probably like the biggest factor that we choose to ignore, or we're not even choosing to ignore, but we're not educated well enough on them. And so this imbalance, it 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 can not only, it doesn't just lead people to a difficult path, but even those that find a good path, so to speak, their lives, it won't be any easier, at least not very much.
Expand on that a little more.
So, like my earlier example is that with smartphones, we are we're over consuming this fiction. Our fantasy is like we're trying too hard to make our fantasy better than our reality, but it and then in the end we're only hurting ourselves because we've been focusing so much on this fantasy that it, it makes it harder to live the actual reality, but our phones are not the reality. So it affects us psychologically, neurologically, biologically, however you want to put it.
Is
But
it easy for you to walk away from this fiction?
now it is, because I've made small changes throughout these past couple of years to not necessarily abandon digital technology, but to try not to let it control me. And it's very small changes, gradual changes, like you had mentioned earlier, I had put my phone in monochrome setting so that the lighting is not so that my reality isn't necessary so that my fantasy, I mean, is not necessarily better than my reality, because I had switched over back to my old phone, and then I checked out my the new phone that I did had, and I was completely enthralled, and just how ridiculously amazing the display looks. And it just gave me this really weird feeling that, like no, this is too much power for a mammal to hold in their hand. Like how is this tiny screen so much more colorful than anything I've ever seen in my life? It's kind of like how native tribes in undiscovered remote locations in the late 20th century were discovered, they were so enthralled by the mirror, by a mirror, that it was as if they were looking into a different dimension, you know? And this wasn't just in the 20th century. This was like way beforehand, you know. Supposedly when Christopher Columbus uh first colonized the Americas, like one of the easiest ways he got to sort of control the natives is that he would trade mirrors for gold or something like that. I'm not sure about the the truth behind that, but I would imagine that seeing a mirror for the first time would be would be magical to say the least. Whereas, Christopher Columbus was just in it to get the gold and the resources. And, we call them Indians, but they're not really Indians because Columbus thought he had landed in India, but he could not have landed farther from there.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that because my dad and I, we were watching a documentary on the Aztecs recently, and we were pretty amazed by, Tenochtitlan, the city that was like what is now Mexico City, that like that glorious civilization that was on the water, and you had to have like bridges from like the mainland come in to get there. It was like a Venice of its own. And how like when Cortez came and he just like took over the place, it's a very fascinating history. And what's interesting about this is like you're Mexican, you know? Do you ever think about that? Like your ancestors might have been a part of like that time and what those like memories, I don't know. It's
Yeah,
it's it's an interesting thing, you know?
yeah, absolutely, because I often view myself as being a a relative of potentially a king and potentially a slave, because
And that's
they
what a Stoic says, doesn't he?
yeah,
There's that one Stoic philosopher, or he might have just been a Greek philosopher, but he says that.
yeah, and you never know. So but you can't take a you can take advantage of either one because you don't know, and that makes it so beautiful and so mysterious. And
Well, the beauty in that, I'm just thinking like off the bat is I don't even say off the bat. This is a side note. On the podcast, sometimes things happen where it's like because the camera's watching me, because we're in a session, I might say things that I don't normally say. I never say off the bat. But anyways, back to my point. It's really cool that Marcus Aurelius was emperor and Epictetus was a slave. And it's like, isn't that beautiful? Because every man comes from a king or a slave, right? Or both. And it's like those two, they're like the epitomes in some sense.
yeah, it's a duality of man, as they like to call it.
Happens all the time, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and that doesn't make you any more or less credible on who your parents were or on who your ancestors were, because in the
Yeah.
end we're all humans. So it's not where you came from, it's what you bring into the world.
Yes. That's very true. What you bring into the world. Yeah. And I think that the Aztecs and the Spanish, that very much happens between them, what you bring into the world.
Yeah, and the Aztecs for sure, they were more advanced than most people give them credit to be, because they had already had knowledge of astronomy and medicines. But but I believe like a lot of people, not it's not their fault, but it's just depending on how we're educated and how you choose to educate yourself as well. We often just see them as primitive, Native Americans, and living a very tough society, where it's like there's human sacrifice, and there's slaves, and it's based entirely on agriculture. And no, it's like, I mean, it might be primitive from like a general holistic standpoint, but they still definitely had some scientific advancements that the Europeans still didn't have.
Yeah, it's a very interesting culture. And I've been fascinated with it for some time now, particularly because of this game, Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Did a very interesting job exploring the Aztecs, Mayans, and the Incans too, I think a little bit. But yeah, it's so interesting, across the globe, all these different cultures that have contributed to like all these different things. And as you were saying, to someone, they might not seem as civilized, but they were civilized. They were a civilization. And it's really cool because it's like, it's just a testament to what human beings are capable of doing, in their own ways. Like, you start from scratch, but you can create something glorious. That potential is very much in you. And I think that's very hopeful.
Yeah, it's in all of us too. It's just how there's certain things that have been suppressing us in different in pretty much any generation, like in the 20th century and even before the 20th century, there's lots of war going on, famine, plague, and other things, other natural, somewhat natural causes. But in modern society, it's as though we are our own enemies, and we have to come up with, you know, either really highly advanced solutions, but in in my point of view, I try to go backwards. I try to see what the people before us did that prevented them from ever having these problems in the first place. So specifically depression and autism, those mental diseases did not exist, like probably not even 100 years ago. So it's only within the past few decades that we started seeing all these signs and all these detriments that.
Explain to me what you once told. Explain to me the science of how when your body undergoes stress or when you're exercising, it releases something, and so your proclivities towards depression and anxiety go down.
Well, the thing is that um, I'm not actually a bio major. I'm a chemical engineering major, but in my free time, I learn about these things on my own because I have a strong passion for it. And there's a lot of mixing of the sciences that they can all relate, like chemistry, biology, psychology. They
Organic
all relate one
chemistry
way.
taught me so much about life. Yeah, they
Yeah.
definitely do.
Yeah. So in terms of the hormone imbalance of depression, what might cause it, what might cure it, is that we we're currently living in a time where it's very easy to get instant gratification, instant satisfaction, I mean, and take it for granted and then just keep doing it over and over again. And it'll eventually feel like it doesn't mean much of anything anymore. So it might be that there's too much dopamine and you're losing sensitivity to that. But it could also be that there's not enough stress hormones that'll that'll that have naturally uh benefited the body so that you can evade such hardship. So like I said, it's a relationship between the good hormones such as dopamine and serotonin and the quote bad hormones, the stress hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline. So adrenaline is probably one of the main ones I see that a lot of people are probably not even paying attention to, that might be missing in their bloodstream, and that can only be acquired through very for through instantaneous, very hard stress factors like exercise, or you know that's that's an artificial stress factor because you have to force yourself to exercise. But like way back when, it used to be humans having to escape from predators, And you can only imagine how scary that must be because we're not at the top of the food pyramid, you know. So we had evolved with having a baseline adrenaline level, and that has gone down significantly over the centuries, and that might be uh one of the leading factors of depression.
If I'm not mistaken, when you wake up in the morning, you get like a cortisol shot. You get kind of scared, so to speak. But what I've realized, uh, especially the more consistently that I've been waking up for Fudger, is that that's kind of gone in a way, or I don't feel it. I'm just because of that, because of faith, I'm okay. I just pray and it's like, oh, I'm up in the morning. But when I wasn't consistently doing that, that cortisol hit me hard, you know? So it's interesting that faith is the thing that very much does give you bravery. Do you think faith gives you bravery?
Yes, uh, because whether it be faith or some other source of hope, you can choose to just stay in bed and then ignore any cortisol, adrenaline, or testosterone boost that your body produces after X amount of sleep cycles. But but because there's natural factors like hunger or the sun waking you up, um, or artificial factors like oh, you have to go to school, so you don't really have a choice, or you have to go to work, etc. Um, keeping the end in mind, the goal, it it definitely helps. The regardless of what the initiating factor might be, like you said, faith, hope,
Yeah.
all these hormones.
I'm glad you mentioned this. And I've been really fascinated with the concept of patience these days, and how, man, patience is such a beautiful thing. It's so difficult too, but it's so beautiful because if you can hold hands with it, it means that you're really looking forward to that long-term thing. You have that vision, and so you hold on, you know? It's very beautiful.
Yeah, patience, like they say, patience is a virtue.
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
but it certainly depends on what the goal is, because sometimes people meet their short-term goals and they're like, oh great, what do I do now? Or if you meet the big long-term goal, it you get the same feeling, it's like, what do I do next?
Yes, I remember it's that movie Tangled, right? Where she like it was her dream to see like the flying lanterns. And then when she's finally on the lake and she sees them, she's like, "Well, what now?" And then the dude says to her, "Well, you go find a new dream and you chase after that." Like, yeah, it kind of is what it is.
Dang, that's beautiful. I had never
Yeah.
seen that film, but that
Dude,
definitely
it's a
holds
great
true.
film, man. Honestly, it is a great film. Tangled's a great film. Songs are
Yeah,
pretty like fire in there too.
I should definitely look into that. But that's a good
Yeah.
point that you prove there. That's It's because sometimes our goals, sometimes some people, they only have like one huge goal that's really hard to accomplish, and then they focus on taking small steps to
Oh
achieve them.
man. Oh my goodness.
But
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, there's definitely other side goals that can benefit you neurologically, make you stronger, that you can accomplish easily, that some people, they don't look into it much, and they should. Like me, I definitely have lots of hobbies, and like I said, I want to be a chemical engineer, but that's not my only goal. There's definitely other smaller goals that I'm working on achieving as well.
It is very important, I think, for a person to try as best as they can to fulfill whatever imaginations or dreams that they have, if they're able to. Because I'll give you an example where, like, I've written two books, right? most people, a lot of people, they think about writing a book like, yeah, like I'll get to it someday, and when I get to it, it'll change my life. Or, yeah, I want to write my EP, right? I want to release my list of songs one day, and when I release those songs, my life will change for the better. But the interesting thing is, like, even after writing my two books, even after having like this podcast and whatnot, I realized like, oh well, my life is kind of the same, more or less, you know? And I have a friend, he's released two albums and they're great songs, but it's like his life is like kind of the same too. And so the point I'm making here is if you wait till like you're 50 or something, thinking that, oh, when I do that, it'll change my life forever, that's not the way to think because maybe that is not going to change everything. So you should try to do it now while you can and just take it as it comes because yeah, like maybe nothing much will change. The only thing I gained from it for myself, I mean there's many things, but the main one is just like personal satisfaction. Like oh, I was able to do that. I respect myself. But it's not like my entire reality is magical or something.
Yeah, and it's funny you should say that because that's another thing that's been going on, that's been running through my mind is that you can't wait till you're old to achieve some of the greatest things that you can. And for sure, one of the biggest issues I've seen recently is that so many people they don't want to get married, don't want to have children. They're like, "Oh, I can do that later," or I just don't want to have them at all. I'm just wondering, like I can only imagine, like by the time you're 30, you're gonna be thinking, "Wow, I must have been really stupid in my 20s to say something like that."
Yeah.
But
We can never be certain, right? And
yeah,
that's the interesting thing about life. It's like we just have our thoughts. But here's
yeah,
an interesting thing, though. There's something interesting Nietzsche said. He said something like, I never regret the things that I've done because it was my choice then was a combination of uh, the way that I was thinking and the way the information was presented to me. He was basically saying it's like it's your experience and what's in front of you, and they collide at the same time. They meet. So that's how you make your choice. So he never regretted it. It's like, okay, it was meant for me to be that way, so to speak.
yeah, yeah, I agree because I've noticed, well, now I more recently I haven't really paid attention to retrospect to what I've done, but the few times that I have, it's more like I don't necessarily regret most of the things I've done. I regret the things that I haven't done that I feel like I should have done that would have made my life better now. And so
Yeah.
that's what I don't want to feel that in the future. So I'm trying to encourage myself to synchronize my body and my mind more and actually put my thoughts into actions and
Yes.
and for sure make sure that the thoughts are positive first and then uh put the action into play.
One of my friends, he said to me, "You never say I wish I did less. You always say I wish I did more."
Yeah, precisely. Because recently I realized that like these past couple of years I've been so stoical and because I've been trying to find inner peace within myself. But that's great for me, but there's not much that others can benefit from that, you know, other than I have no intent to harm anything or anyone. But that had that made me feel complacent with being alone, and I feel like I kind of learned the hard way now that that's not the way to go. That's not a good thing. It's
What
not
is the way to go?
to be more human, you know, embrace what little time you have because you never know when your last day is going to be. So, like I said, synchronize your body and your mind more, and you'll find so much more satisfaction in that. because you and those around you will benefit from the positive thoughts that you want to bring upon the world. Because I know for sure I had lots of love and respect for everyone, but I always kept that just within me, because for one, I didn't like talking very much, and two, I didn't want to feel like I was bothering anyone. But now I'm like,
You were saying you were saying you didn't want to. So you cared for people, but you didn't want to bother them. What does that mean?
that I was too busy focusing on trying to maintain my inner peace that I didn't realize with a power like this, I can help others find peace mutually together and not in solitude.
But what does that word bother mean? I'm very fascinated that you use that particular word.
Bother in the sense that if I try to approach someone with a certain idea in my head, it might not go the way that I expected, and it might turn out to be a potentially bad decision that I made. But that
Would you
was
con
from a lack of confidence that I realized
Yeah,
that there's actually a much higher chance that approaching someone, you might actually make them happier as opposed to making them upset.
yeah. Would you consider yourself an introvert?
Yeah, I used to be, but like I said, I noticed that that wasn't going very well. So recently I've been trying to make changes to be more extroverted and making sure that the thoughts that I'm putting into actions are positive and not so much potentially negative.
So, of course, you can't speak for all introverts, but I'm curious about what you think. Do you think introverted people don't approach others because they think they might bother them?
Um, that's certainly how I felt. I was always under the impression that I could just let the universe take its natural flow, regardless of what input I have on it. That if my input is to do nothing, then that it was meant to be that way. And that if my input was to finally speak up and do something, then then that was entirely up to me. But under both scenarios, both you and the universe are coming into play. There's never an equation where you are not a variable.
I like that. And it's very interesting you say that because I've been thinking these days about how I feel like, so I'm an ambivert. I'm in between the extrovert introvert. I have a lot of extroverted tendencies, but if I choose to be, I just won't speak to people. And I'm fine with the silence. I'm fine with the seriousness. But I feel like because of the extroverted tendencies I have to be the one that instigates everything with the people in my life. And for a while, that made me upset because I was just upset that all these people are so shy and they're so in their shells. But then with some time and experience, I came to realize actually, like, it's okay if things are like this. Like, it's my role to be the instigator, you know? And I can just deal my cards as best as I can. So, it's interesting that you mentioned that about the whole like you're always a variable, you know? That's kind of what it is, really.
Yeah, because inaction is a type of action. If you
Most
choose to,
definitely.
yeah, if you choose to do nothing, then depending on the scenario, on you might actually be a detriment to society as opposed to uh actually helping everyone, feel happier in a way.
It's so
And
true, man. It's
like
so
like you
true.
said, it's I was okay with it for a long time, but I got fed up with it. I didn't like how others were so introverted, and I didn't like how I was being so introverted.
Hmm.
And now I'm trying to encourage others to, you know, not necessarily be more extroverted, but don't bottle everything up, you know?
Yes.
Whether it's emotions, ideas, uh, actions, etc. Learn to be more human, you know? Stop trying to be a robot, you know? Because that's kind of how I was sort of behaving, you know? It's one thing to be stoical, but it's another thing to just try to be straight up robotic, you know? There's a time and place for certain behaviors, but too often did I feel like either I was being robotic or others were being robotic or or they were treating me or I was treating them, you know, like if we weren't human. But
Mm.
that is such a negative behavior that I don't see society thriving on. We wouldn't prosper like this, you know. We have to have a sense of community and a sense of belonging in each other's lives, you know. And I was gonna tell you that as well too, you know, like I feel like there's so many people that don't know the simple answer to one of the most profound questions, one of the most simple questions I've ever heard. And I'm gonna ask you right now, do you know for whom the bell tolls?
I have my answer for this. The bells toll for the hero, the person that stepped into the light, the person that presents themselves, that does something. What is the
Wow,
answer?
you were very
Santa
close.
Claus?
No, so the saying, I think is like a saying, a proverb or whatever, or I think it's just like from the one author. It's actually the name of a book by this one author, but the saying goes, or at least it might just be a section. It goes, for whom the bell tolls, and then the bell tolls for thee. So it's an analogy to that whenever someone dies and you hear the church bells tolling at the funeral, it's not them that's dying, it's you because they were a part of you, because they lived in your society, and regardless of how well you knew that person, they played a role in your life in one way or another. So I know that living in a big city, that it's much harder to comprehend such an idea. But back then, when small towns and civilizations were way smaller, it would make more sense, you know? Because like for example, if you lived in a village of like 100 people and one of them died, like that's 99 people only left. You probably knew everyone's names too when it's a population that small. So if you had a personal connection with that person, it feels as though a part of you is gone.
It is so fascinating that you say this. I really like that. My response actually came from a poem that I had written. I didn't talk about bells, but I talked about rose petals. And the idea that I had was the rose petals are thrown for like the hero that comes into the city, right? The knight, so to speak. And they're celebrate the people celebrate that person because that person was brave enough to do their best at whatever they did, you know? Like a knight, for example. He took his skills or whatever. He went out and he fought whatever dragon, so to speak, right? Then he came back into the city as a victor. So people celebrate that sort of bravery. He stepped into the light of his destiny type thing. And I think that both of these things that we mentioned, the bells tolling, the rose petals being thrown, this is kind of like in some way related to extroversion and introversion. I wanted to say earlier, I don't know, I don't think I would say that, one of them is good and one of them is bad. I definitely think they both have their strengths and disadvantages, and I've experienced both of those on both sides. But my sister, she was a bit shy before, but this past year, she like was a bit more like outgoing, and so I asked her about her experience, and she's like, like being more extroverted only helped me, didn't really hurt me, and so I thought it was cool, that there's definitely different perspectives to these things.
Yeah, for sure. And there, yeah, yeah, I agree. There's benefits and disadvantages uh, to both mindsets. And for sure, like we're humans, so we have very high neuroplasticity compared to some other organisms, compared
Explain
to
that.
other mammals. Oh, uh, well, I'm not sure what sort of dietary or environmental process had led us to this. I'm still learning about it, but we're like one of the few organisms that pretty much dominates like almost every continent on the planet. It's like Antarctica is like the only one because it's inhospitable. But like no other organism has done like quite the awesomeness that we have achieved, whether it
And is
be through a natural process or through technology.
the neuroplasticity though, is it principally connected to like thought or what how is that factor related to this?
What I see, the way I see it is that intelligence and neuroplasticity are not exactly the same. The way I see it is that neuroplasticity is having the ability to connect the dots,
Hmm,
whereas intelligence is simply having the dots.
I like that.
So, so yeah. So if you live in country X and you ever only bother exposing you and you don't ever bother exposing yourself to cultures and educations from outside of country X, then you're gonna have a neuroplasticity limited to the lifestyle of said country. And that's just an example. I say country, but it's really just any type of society, any sort of lifestyle, any just
Any bit of knowledge.
knowledge, way of life.
Yeah. That's very interesting that you're mentioning this.
Yeah, and there's lots of ways of improving it, but I know some are more difficult than others, but one of the easiest ways that I've done it is to try to listen to music from other places. And for sure, I've I've listened to music from popular countries and from countries that people don't even know exist. And I find beauty in almost pretty much all of them. Like wow, this sounds very similar to the music from this place, but I really appreciate the differences, because I don't enjoy having to listen to the same thing over and over again. And I feel like people don't do that often enough. Like I know here in America, like I feel like it would be very uncommon to see anyone listening to like a heavy metal rock band from Germany or that also likes enjoying to traditional Japanese music or pop music from the Middle East. Like I like to expose myself to things that I'm not used to, but I feel like I'm not seeing enough of that in others. And I would definitely encourage others to step outside of the comfort zone, and they'll probably be more impressed and more satisfied as opposed to sticking within your bubble and not risking any sort of discomfort or fear that you might have.
My interest in musicians escalated when I realized that they were me. They were writers. And so personally, I'm not very interested in instruments. I'm not really interested in like, composition, so to speak, or any of that sort of stuff. I mean, it's cool, it has its place, but my main interest is like the lyrical genius. I remember I first detected it with Lana Del Rey. When I would hear her, I'd be like, this is a poet speaking. And then like, I left that alone. And then Jim Morrison was where I really saw it, where I was like, this is a writer. That's who I was drawn to, the writer, the poet, more than the musician. And then it went to, Chris Cornell and Kurt Cobain. It's like, yeah, like these guys, they're very much writers, especially Chris Cornell. So that's my interest in it. It's the lyrics, it's the message, it's the story that's being put out there, the poem that is being spoken. what is it about music that draws you? Because having an interest in music in different cultures, it's like you could maybe, look up the translation or whatever, but it's not the same thing, is it? So what is it that draws you to music?
Um, because some of these songs or compositions that some of them don't even have lyrics, so it's purely uh dissonance and consonance and uh euphonious sounds like
So would you say
a
you're
lot
more
of
interested in
cultures.
the instrumental?
Yeah, there's definitely lots of lyrical value in a lot of songs, but I have more interest in the instrumentation because that's like the root of the music, you know. If it wasn't
Yeah.
for the instrumentation, it would just be spoken poetry, you know, if it has lyrics at all. But the instrumentation, depending on the culture, they try to achieve uh beautiful sounds and harmonies through different scales, different instruments, different number of instruments, and you know it's so intriguing to see how both the very simple and the very complicated just makes you feel can make you feel well, you know. And especially like how I said, even without lyrics, it's like they're still speaking poetry, you know, just not with words, but with
Mm,
the sounds themselves.
yeah. It is an interesting thing. Yeah, music, it's something. It's
Yeah.
definitely something. And there's just so much of it. And it's so cool because like one of my favorite songs is called Nutshell by Alice in Chains. But Nutshell is like nothing like it's so beautiful, but it's nothing like Assassin's Creed 2 instrumental music, which is also really beautiful. It's like they're so different but beautiful. It's so cool.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also the simplicity and the complicatedness that comes into play, you know. Uh because um music evolved initially as just like percussion and eventually woodwind instruments, and it wasn't anything complicated, you know. We weren't uh super concerned about the intricacy of music when it was first, you know, coming into fruition. But later on, like towards the Renaissance era, that's when instruments started becoming, you know, more intricate, and the music, you know, it definitely encompassed that, and it kept snowballing. It kept getting more complicated over the past few centuries up until like the contemporary era where music there's certain pieces of compositions that I've heard that sound so complicated that they don't particularly sound good anymore, you know. But that's my opinion, and I know others can definitely find the beauty in both the most simplest and the most complicated of music.
Yeah. You're a fan of Beethoven, right?
Yes, Beethoven, but my favorite composer is J.S. Bach.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, so and his music, it's it
What do
is
you
like
think
he's
Bach is saying in his music? What do you hear? Like, I know there's no lyrics, but what do you hear in what he has put out there?
it sounds like he's actually having a conversation with the audience via the instrument, you know? Because his music is it's not very repetitive at all. It's sometimes there's repeat symbols where he just plays a really large phrase again, but like in the short term, in the motifs, whatever you want to call them, it's as though every line is different, you know. He rarely ever puts an ostinato in his music at all. I don't think I can actually name a single piece where he uses an ostinato, where he uses a repeated line and he just keeps repeating it in the background, you know? And that's apart from any uh percussion, you know, because in Baroque music, percussion wasn't really uh a factor. It was kind of left out. It was more of an intricate, an adornment, I mean, in sheet music. Um, but yeah, like I said, it's as though he's actually talking, you know, because whenever anyone has a conversation, it's not like we say the same thing twice, right? It it keeps flowing, you know. And unlike modern music, where there's definitely lots of repetition going on, and not that that's necessarily a bad thing, you know. If the beat is good, if the riff is good, if the chorus is good, it it it, it feels good to have it legitimized and and repeated again, you know, maybe once or twice. But like I was saying with Bach's music, he doesn't do that, you know. It flows from start to finish, and the note selection, it it does a pretty good job of embodying that every note is just, it's like he's not afraid of making any of the notes potentially sound bad. And there's like so many accidentals in the sheet music, like notes that aren't supposed to be in the scale that he uses anyway.
The
And
improvisation.
yeah, and it just works out so beautifully, you know. And I would definitely recommend checking out pretty much any of his works. I know his uh his latest works are the most popular ones, but even his earliest works, it's like it's like he was never a bad composer. It's like I don't know how he got so good so early. I know he definitely took lots of inspiration from I forgot the other composer's name, but I know also Vivaldi. He got a lot of inspiration from him.
Interesting. It's very cool to see you have such a passion when you're speaking about these people. Because to me, it's like I've just never been able to get into that, you know? But again, this goes back to that thing about like humans all over the globe and how we all have the potential and we're all so different. It's like that speaks to you, that calls to you. And to me, it's like something totally else, you know, it's grunge really. And it's
Yeah, yeah,
like it's just so interesting how, you know, that is. Just people are just drawn to different things.
yeah. And it's not your fault. It's not my fault. It's just we had we had these circumstances, and some of us are lucky enough to put ourselves under different circumstances to look out of a different window, get a different view of the world. But it's not necessarily anyone's fault if they don't have that other window of opportunity. But
Yeah.
I definitely did, and anyone with a smartphone definitely and an internet connection has an opportunity to check out this music. But even with the
Yes.
window available, it uh we're just not encouraged enough to open the blinds or open the window and actually look out of it and see what's on the other side, you know, as opposed to just sticking with the first window that you looked out of, you know, try looking out of it somewhere else.
Yes. And I think in some sense, this is why you and me connect so well as we do, because I think of myself as a very eclectic man. There's so many different things that I've been exposed to, and I wasn't really afraid to explore, you know, deeper, so to speak. And I feel like, you know, you're a man of similar tendencies, eclectic in that sense. And it also makes me think, like, for instance, like, um, you became a Muslim, right? And it's like, what was that experience like for you? How did you come on to that?
Well, I tried to do some more research about, you know, about it, and you know, what how is it that there's so many people that have these different faiths, and why would anyone think that theirs is better than someone else's? And one of the biggest factors for me was how the community connects with itself, how people connect with each other. And I wasn't particularly fond of my lifestyle in Christianity, because many people uh they weren't it felt as though we didn't really necessarily care about each other and we were just kind of pretending to do so. And I definitely don't speak for all Christians, obviously. That's just how it felt for me because, depending on how secular you are, it's it's a strong faith, it's a weak faith, but in both circumstances you are susceptible to feeling like you're not a part of a strong community. But after converting, I did not feel that way at all. With Islam, you're encouraged to actually connect with your brothers and sisters and make sure that we're not pretending to be something we're not.
Yes, yes. I really like that you said that. And it was making me think of something that Malik once said, which was that there's a reason that monkhood is prohibited in Islam. We're not supposed to be people that kind of, go to a monastery and are isolated in that lifestyle. We're supposed to be people that are one with the community, we're supposed to mingle. And I think the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that, you know, the community, it comes with its difficulties. You don't always get along with everyone all the time, but stick with it because there are blessings in it, or something like that. And I think that's really beautiful, and it's hopeful too.
Yes, absolutely. It's like an ecosystem. There's the imbalance is what triggers certain factors to come into play. So within the society, um, if there's not enough of product X being produced or consumed, then people are gonna chase after a different venue. They're gonna go down a different avenue, and it'll balance out the equation. And it's much harder to make that example within a society with humans, but for sure in like an ecosystem, if there's too many herbivores, it'll be easy for the carnivores to lower their population and balance the ecosystem. Or if it's the opposite, if there's too few herbivores, then the carnivores are going to have a much tougher time feeding their offspring. And then because there's fewer carnivores, um, that'll help the herbivore population bounce back. And that's that's a very obvious example that we were probably taught in like middle school or something. But it's the same thing with society. If too many people are doing this uh labor, this type of labor, then we're gonna chase after a different one.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned this. Jordan Peterson, he said something very profound. He articulated it very well. He said, opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated. And I think that's deep, very deep.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's like the economic systems as well. But obviously capitalism, where you're encouraged that if your job isn't in particularly high demand, then try looking for a different job that is in demand. Just like the ecosystem, it balances itself out. It's just that with economic systems, it's a bit more complicated than that, unfortunately. But the point still remains.
Yeah. There was something that we were talking about earlier. I didn't get a chance to say it, but I wanted to explore it with you. We were talking about inaction and how inaction is also a choice. Here's the interesting thing. Inaction is tricky. Like it can be the best thing to do, but it can also be the worst thing to do. And Alan Watts, he has a very interesting quote. He says, "The best way to clear murky water is to leave it alone." Murky, yeah, something like that. But yeah, what do you think, man, about inaction?
That yeah, that depends on the scenario, because murky water. like it clears itself out when you let the sediment uh settle down to the bottom. But not all waters are murky, you know. There's also dead waters, uh or any
Clear
fluid,
streams.
yeah, moving bodies of water,
Yeah.
uh stagnant waters, you know. So that represents the scenario, and then whatever you do to the water, that would be your input.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. Whatever you do to the water, that would be your input, or whatever you don't do to the water either, right?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
inaction. Yeah.
Yeah, so with murky water, if you leave it alone, it might not be murky anymore if you let the sediment settle down.
It will be
But
cleared.
yeah, but with a moving body of water, if you don't do anything, it'll just keep moving, you know, it'll still be a stream.
I like
But
how, yeah,
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 unlike with a beaver, you could put something in the way and that would stop the water from flowing, and that would
yeah,
flood the area and potentially increase the biodiversity, because now that the water is still, it attracts more insects, and then those insects attract uh insect eating animals, and then those animals, you know, they start living there and, you know, increase the biodiversity.
yeah. It's so interesting that you say this because um, I meet people like you, right? Where you're so eclectic. But then, like, the deeper we get into a conversation, I realize, like, oh, wait, like, yes, eclectic, but this is the trajectory you're in. And with you, I've noticed it's like it's with the sciences. You always somehow like connect the deepness to like science. My friend Roderick, he's also very similar, he's very eclectic. And the deeper I get into it with him, I realize like, whoa, he's always connecting it to like physics or like something to do with engineering. It's just so fascinating that the deeper the conversation gets, I realize like, oh, that's what it is. That's that main thing that captivates the guy or the girl.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I hope to see in more people, you know, because if you only look at the either the cause or the effect, and you don't really have a comprehension of like the fundamental of it, then it's like it would be as though you're only it's as though you're only taking advantage of either or. But when you actually try to understand the the actual materialistic side of how it works, then it's like, wow, it's a little bit harder to understand, but it makes more sense that way, you know, because I was always more, you know, like science based, you know, stoical, like I say. But taking only that point of view, it it doesn't enthrall people as much, you know. So you got to find a way to express it as well. So that's what I've been trying to learn how to do, you know, because if I just speak technical jargon all over the place, people people won't find it interesting, you know. Maybe very nerdy people, but you know,
No, you're right.
I want to make it more interesting for the people that know little about it, so that I could enlighten them, you know.
Yeah. In some sense, you have to become a jack of all trades, so to speak. In some sense. Like my aunt, she told me something very interesting. She's like, honestly, every person on earth is a business person because you have to be, you know? And it's true. Like yeah, it's just true.
Yeah, that's natural selection for you, you know. You have to sell your genes to a potential mate and see what they like about you, you know. And it's not your and in modern society, it's not genes anymore. It's it's your character, you know, because people, both men and women, they they don't want to they don't want to stick with a partner that doesn't seem to have very much value, you know. Like, and
Yeah.
it's become very evident that it's not about physical appearance at all, because there's definitely like some very famous people that have been that have been I don't want to say ridiculed, but have been made fun of for not being particularly beautiful, and yet their spouses are very beautiful, you know. I'm not gonna say any names, but it just goes to show and prove the point that it's about what you bring to the table, you know, and not
Very much
your
so.
appearance. Yeah.
It was Jordan Peterson, I believe. Yeah, it was him. He said stupid is disadvantageous by its nature. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. And then Shay Gamar, he also said something interesting. He said, everyone is attracted to the strong, no one is attracted to the weak. And it's true, man. You know? So yeah, it's like what you said. What do you bring to the table type thing? It's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was
And
wondering, yeah, go ahead.
and it's not just about the big things, you know, it's not just about like money or confidence, you know, it's also about the small things that, you know, like how you treat others, like even if you don't know them, even if it's only for a few seconds,
Yes.
and for sure smiling and greeting others, you know, that's one small change that I've been trying to make, you know, because I would definitely appreciate it if others, you know, treated me as a human and smiled at me and, you know, said hi. And, you know, so I thought, you know, why don't I try doing that to others, you know? Like I know with like a lots of guys, they would appreciate it if like a beautiful woman had made eye contact with them and said hi, like even if it's just like a simple greeting and they walked away. So, you know, why don't you view yourself as being the beautiful woman and try making the first move, you know, instead of just being the shy guy, you know, because you're not going to go anywhere just being a shy guy. I mean, I learned that the hard way.
Yeah, there's I like that thing that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, says, which is that smiling's a charity, you know, in our faith. So I think it's cool. I was wondering, Robert, this has been a really cool conversation. Do you have any closing thoughts? Anything you felt like you wanted to say, but didn't get a chance to, or something on your mind that you wanted to express?
Uh, yeah, I know I've told you this before, but you have to keep in mind that some of us complain about how little time we have, but we still act as though our days are infinite. And, you know, it's really easy to say, but hard to put into action, you know, about what changes you can and should make to stop behaving that way and make the change now to synchronize your mind and your body. But I know that's much more difficult in the modern age and living in America where we're so used to being under the comfort of uh continuously being fed every day and not having to worry about some sort of attack, whether it be through a military or domestic terrorism. Like for the most part, most of us don't have to worry about that, you know, and we shouldn't take that for granted. But that those are the bad things that could um feel like we should be in a sense of fear. But there's also the good things that we need to be very careful that we're not over consuming. So whether it be smartphones, your laptop, books even, you don't want to read too much fiction. You don't want your fantasy to be better than your reality. So
I like that.
I want to encourage others to make sure that the reality is just as good, if not better, than your fantasy.
I love it. And it's as you said to me before, you got to stop taking the immortality pill. I love it.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks so much for being here, Robert.
Yeah,
Suppose until
absolutely.
next time, my friend.
Anytime. I hope we can do this some other time.
Inshallah, right?
Inshallah.